Excellencies, dear colleagues, you know that these events are very short here at the Human Rights Council, so we will now formally start this event. I would like to start by thanking the Special Rapporteur on the human rights to safe drinking water and sanitation, Dr. Pedro Arroyo Agudo, for bringing us together this morning to reflect on the thematic report that he presented yesterday to the Council. This side event to the 54th session of the Human Rights Council is organized by your office in collaboration with the Permanent Mission of Germany and the Permanent Mission of Spain to the United Nations in Geneva, as well as the Geneva Environment Network. I am Diana Rizzolio, the coordinator of the UNEP Geneva Environment Network, and I will have the pleasure to moderate this session. In Geneva, water is at the center of various governmental processes and initiatives. Numerous organizations focus on water issues, making this region a strategic hub for global water governance. And we have indeed in the room some of these processes represented. I think I saw the Secretary of the UN Water Convention, Sonia Koppel, and we have Musanda, who is the Secretary General of the Ramsar Wetlands Convention. So this morning we are joined by leading experts and diplomats actively engaged on these issues to discuss the Special Rapporteur report to this session of the Council, highlighting the alarming degradation of aquatic ecosystems. The discussion this morning will also include a gender perspective. And in the interest of time, I will be introducing the speakers when giving them the floor. So to formally welcome you, I invite Her Excellency Ambassador Katharina Stasch, the permanent representative of Germany to the United Nations in Geneva, to deliver opening remarks. Germany is, with Spain, supported of the Special Rapporteur mandate and the core group of this mandate. Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for moderating this event, and a very warm welcome to everybody here in this room. It's a great pleasure to have you here at this early hour on a Friday morning. And I think it really shows the importance of the subject. And you know that we engage very heavily in the topic, not only here in the Council, but anywhere and in other places as well. And I will come back to that in a minute. And I'm very thankful that my dear colleague Aurora is here on the podium, with whom we fight every day for very good water resolution. And of course, the Special Rapporteur. I think we had a very good session yesterday. We just talked about it. And thanks for moving things on and keeping it on the agenda. And thanks for a very lively discussion yesterday in the Council. And last but not least, I'm extremely happy to finally meet in person Musanda Mumba, whom, we've seen a lot from each other in the virtual sphere, and it's really great to finally meet you in person and also share the podium with you. And I'm extremely curious and happy to listen to what you say from your vast experience. Now, as I said yesterday also in the Human Rights Council, we heard powerful messages yesterday. And I think it's very important to link the human rights to drinking water and sanitation and the human right to a clean, healthy and sustainable environment. And these two go hand in hand. And it really shows how securing these rights entails our obligation to protect our aquatic ecosystems. And this is what this side event is about today. Now, this does not only refer to technical development. It does not stop at water purification or wastewater treatment, and it does not stop, and that's important, and that's why we sit here in a UN sitting, it does not stop at borders. Tackling climate change and water scarcity from a human rights perspective requires more than that, and it needs inclusive democratic water governance based on transparency, public participation, international cooperation and accountability. And I think we will hear from the colleagues on the podium, what does this mean concretely for the work, for your daily work and for the work on the ground with the people. So it's really a joint obligation for everyone. Just 1 minute about my own country. So you might have seen that we have adopted a national water strategy to support our national implementation of SDG 6, because as I said at another occasion, human rights protection starts at home, and this is also true for the SDGs. And with this strategy, we aim to protect natural water reserves, take precautionary measures to prevent water scarcity, avoid conflicts of use, and employ improve the status of water bodies and water quality. We are also, and now comes back the international perspective, we are also one of the biggest donors in the water sector and committed to the issue of water in numerous international initiatives. And you might know in UN Water, also in the Global Water Partnership, and here in Geneva, together with Spain, I talked about, we really engage a lot in the Human Rights Council on our resolution on human rights to water and sanitation. Well, we will continue our dialogue, but for now, I would say let's start with our side event. I'm extremely curious to listen to you, to hear more from you, and with this, I give back the floor to our moderator. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Excellency. After your warm welcome, the Special Rapporteur on the human rights to safe drinking water and sanitation will now be setting the context of our discussion, providing our audience today with the overview of the report that he presented yesterday to the Council and the strong messages he addressed to the Council. Dr. Pedro Arroyo Agudo, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you very much. Thank you to Germany and Spain. I exist because of you. The mandate exists because of you. And thank you for your support. Thank you, the Foundation, and thank you also for you. Thank you for all of you for coming at this time, on this day. Well, since my appointment as Special Rapporteur, I have been insisting that the paradoxical water crisis on the planet water, I used to say, the blue planet, no? We are, in fact, experiencing with 2 billion people without guaranteed access to safe drinking water, is not, properly speaking, a crisis of scarcity, but of governance. I don't mean that there are no problems of scarcity, but I mean the main issue, and in fact I say the large majority of these 2 billion people are not properly thirsty people without water in their living environments, but impoverished, extremely impoverished people living next to rivers or aquifers polluted, very often with toxins, or overexploited by abusive or unsustainable economic activities. The roots of this crisis, is my point of view, general point of view, lie in the unsustainability of the current development model based on the paradigm of domination of nature. It is necessary to move towards a new model of environmental regeneration. I insist on this. We have destroyed so much our surrounding that we need to regenerate, not just to conserve. Of course, a new model based on the paradigm of sustainability, while promoting water governance based on human rights approach. These are the keys for me. Wetlands, rivers, and lakes are the backbone, is well known, of life on islands and continents. The aquifers are the water lungs of nature. And they feed the base flows of these ecosystems and constitute a strategic natural reserve to water drops. Aquatic ecosystems have provided, is another reflection. This huge network of aquatic ecosystems have provided the natural supply network for human settlements for tens of thousands of years. We used to say, what is the coverage of the network? Well, we had a global coverage for everybody, no? In general, no? Is this natural network, no? Especially, but this importance, this network is not just for the past. It continues to be vital for the present, but especially for the rural communities and for indigenous peoples who depend directly on them. Today, however, overexploitation, land grabbing, and contamination not only break the sustainability of nature of these ecosystems, but also break the human rights of the most impoverished. This is the key of this report. Aquatic ecosystem contamination by heavy metals is one of the issues in which perhaps I am too much impressed by after my last official visit to Peru. Really, I used to say I never cried so much as these 12 days in Peru, receiving delegations from the communities, more than 200 delegations, very well organized, most of them presided by women with little papers of their sons, the blood analysis of their sons, teachers of the schools with 60, all contaminated with heavy metals, crying and saying, what can do the United Nations for us? What can we do with this? I have poisoned my son, my doctor, during 5 years. I didn't know, no one told me nothing. What can we do? And I said every day, at the moment, what can I do is to cry with you. And then I will try to make visible this problem and to ask the countries to open the debate, at least to open the debate on this issue. I know that it's difficult to have consensus. I know. But the consensus only can be done if we begin to push, begin to argue, to begin to present arguments and data and realities. So this is why yesterday, in my report, I asked for opening discussions at the international level to explore the inclusion of these actions, these massive and systematic pollution among the crimes defined in the Rome Statute as crimes against humanity, and insisting also that it's necessary to continue to approve and regulate the crime of ecocide. It's so important in this world at present. Well, there are other problems, of course. Biological pollution, we forget sometimes, 1.8 million people every year just dead by diarrhea, most of them children once again. The unsustainable growth of irrigation with overexploitation of aquifers, and also toxic pollution, don't forget it, with pesticides, more and more. It's a silent contamination. But at the end, we have this contamination in the water, in the drinking water, not safe. Well, this unsustainable growth with these problems finally ruins also aquifers that are, in the perspective of climate change, they are the strategic reserves for the droughts. Of course, we can build dams, and we have done a lot, but the main reserve is under us, the aquifers. The privatization of water insists also favor also both the bankruptcy of sustainability of ecosystems and the human rights to the most impoverished, because the environment and the impoverished people cannot compete in the markets. Climate change, at the end, contribute to breaking the sustainability of aquatic ecosystems, altering rainfall patterns with disproportionate impacts. And this is also very, very important on those living in poverty, and particularly, especially on women who bear both questions, the burden of fetching water and also taking care of those who get sick from drinking contaminated water. So the most interested, the most committed with this challenge are women, not because you are better or not, because you are in the position, you are in the front line with these questions. Well, and so in this sense, as a conclusion, recovering the good ecological status and aquatic ecosystem becomes a central axis of the necessary adaptation strategies and policies to minimize the impacts of climate change, mainly on the ones who live in conditions of more vulnerability. And finally, I have made a reflection on something that is, and I finish with this, the recognition of the human rights to healthy environment, and in particular to aquatic ecosystems in good conditions, becomes into convergence, as you said, no, with the fulfillment of the human rights to drinking water and sanitation. And I know that what I will say immediately sometimes is controversial, at least. But at the end, I thought I put it or not, I do it in the report. I think that this convergence is in tune with the ancestral vision of indigenous worldviews that today promote the recognition of legal personality to rivers and aquatic ecosystems essential for their survival. We need a discussion on this. It's not evident. There are also problems. But I think the main mean of this convergence is a good sign. Apparently opposite visions, worldviews, humanocentric, or center, how do you say in English? Humanocentric or center? Yes, humanocentric and ecocentric, apparently opposed. At the end, convergence. So it's a good sign it's a good sign. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pedro Arroyo Agudo. Now that the context is provided with strong and moving messages on the need for environmental regeneration, and you also refer to the large-scale poisoning of water that has affected millions of people around the world, and the call for beginning discussions on the inclusion of such actions as crimes against humanity. We will turn to our distinguished panelists who have joined us to discuss the findings of the report and some of the elements you have mentioned here. For the discussion, we are joined by three eminent environmentalists and leading experts. The first, let me mention the three. Kate McIntosh is joining us online. She is the Executive Director of the Promise Institute for Human Rights Europe and Deputy Co-Chair of the Independent Expert Panel for the Legal Definition of Ecocide in 2020-2021. We are also joined here in person in the room by Musonda Mumba, who is the Secretary General of the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands, one of the important bodies addressing safeguarding of water resources, as previously mentioned. And finally, we have also David Boyd, who has pre-recorded the message. David is the Special Rapporteur for Human Rights and the Environment. As I was mentioning, we have heard from the Special Rapporteur that there is an alarming degradation of aquatic ecosystems and the call for beginning discussions on the inclusion of such actions as crimes against humanity and consideration of ecocide. So I'm turning to the first panelist, Kate McIntosh, who is joining us online, as I mentioned. You are a long-standing expert on the notion of ecocide. Maybe you could develop further on this and on the links between water sources contamination and ecosystem destruction. Ms. McIntosh, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much.
So please unmute yourself and you should appear on the screen.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hi, can everyone hear me? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, very good. Okay. So good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for the invitation to join you today, and congratulations to Professor Arroyo Agudo on his powerful report. And I wish I was with you in person. Would love to meet all of you in person as well. I was, of course, particularly pleased to see your recommendation that discussions be initiated at the international level to explore the use of international criminal law to address these staggering problems that you identify in your report. And, you made that point very forcefully just now. So in my short remarks, I'll address 3 points. First of all, I want to look at whether the actions that you identify in your report could be a crime against humanity already. Secondly, whether they could amount to ecocide under the definition we've proposed. And finally, just maybe a reflection on what international criminal law might add to this struggle to solving this problem and how it might address the gender dimension of this human rights crisis. So first of all, could the actions identified in the Special Rapporteur's report be a crime against humanity? And I'm talking now about the toxic, the toxic poisoning from the heavy metals extraction from the mining activities that we just heard about from Professor Arroyo-Agudo. So the Special Rapporteur seemed to conclude actually that they couldn't, but I would like to come back and encourage us all to think about whether they might already be. I don't think we should completely rule this out. So looking at the examples cited by the Special Rapporteur, quoting from his report, he talks about toxic contamination from certain mining operations which have the following characteristics. First of all, systematic contamination beyond accidental risks. Secondly, severe and massive damage to the health of millions of people. Thirdly, that there is an awareness of the progressive poisoning of the population by those responsible, even if there's no will or intention to cause it. And then chillingly, the last point, that the population does not perceive the poisoning, which is cumulative and irreversible and has particularly severe conditions for children. So it seems to me that there must be some circumstances in which this activity rises to the level of a widespread or systematic attack on a civilian population, which is the definition of a crime against humanity. So to those of you not familiar with international criminal law, an attack may sound as if it's not referring to the kind of activities we're talking about, but actually an attack in the sense of a crime against humanity is a multiple commission of acts pursuant to a state or organizational policy. So it seems to me that we've got a tick there, right, in some of the situations that you identify in your report. Then the acts themselves would have to, they're not indeed, as the Special Rapporteur says, they're not articulated in the crime against humanity. There's nothing about poisoning of aquifers and water sources, but there is an open-ended category in crimes against humanity of other inhumane acts. So these inhumane acts have to intentionally cause great suffering or serious injury to body or to mental or physical health. And here we have the question which Professor also raised of intention. But under the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, intention to cause a consequence is present if the perpetrator knows that the results are virtually certain result of the acts. So it seems to me that there must be some circumstances which do fit, and perhaps Peru is the context, which do already fit the definition of a crime against humanity. But certainly it's not guaranteed, and my point is most definitely not to undermine the important argument that international criminal law does not immediately offer itself as a remedy for even extreme environmental destruction and the resulting human suffering. And as was mentioned, I was a member of a panel which sought to remedy this lack by proposing a new international crime of ecocide to be included in the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. So what about that? Well, prima facie, certainly some of the cases identified in the Special Rapporteur's report would meet our definition of ecocide. Our definition is both human-centric and ecocentric, actually. So it does take into account massive harm caused to humans, of course, but it doesn't require that harm to be proved in order for the crime of ecocide to be successfully prosecuted. So just to briefly introduce our definition, we defined, or we propose that ecocide be defined as unlawful or wanton acts committed with knowledge that there is a substantial likelihood of severe and either widespread or long-term damage to the environment being caused by those acts. And some of the definitions that we add are relevant to the examples we've been discussing. So damage is severe when it involves very serious adverse changes, disruption or harm to any element of the environment, including grave impacts on human life. Damage is widespread when it extends beyond a limited geographic area, crosses state boundaries, or is suffered by an entire ecosystem or species, or a large number of human beings. And here I'd like to underscore the links between water source contamination and ecosystem destruction, which would be exactly the kind of thing that would be captured by the crime of ecocide. I'll move on to my next point, which is to zoom out a little and think about how international criminal law helps what does international criminal law add to this situation, to the solution of this problem? Well, of course, it can hold perpetrators accountable, as the Special Rapporteur mentions in his report. I'd also like to add to that the expressive value of international criminal law, which I think should not be underestimated. International crimes are the crimes that the global community has decided are the worst acts, and they are completely beyond the pale. And wherever they occur, they are crimes against all of us. And I think this is one of the fundamental points actually in the Special Rapporteur's report. I think drawing attention to this as an international crime, this kind of behaviour as an international crime, can shift the narrative. It can shift the narrative in very important ways. And more concretely, it can have an impact directly on behaviour, a deterrent function. And I think perhaps especially with regard to corporate leaders who would be very sensitive, I believe, to the possibility of being even accused, certainly indicted, and most certainly convicted for an international crime for their industrial activities. And then finally, I think criminal law in itself is interesting in that it takes the burden from the victim. So we've seen many creative legal actions are going on across the world on behalf of the victims in domestic courts, so suing oil companies or extractive industry more broadly. We see appeals to the human rights bodies, which are building really important and powerful jurisprudence, but they rest on the victim to bring the case. So the victims have to find resources, energy and support in order to take these cases to court, sometimes substantial financial resources. Whereas a criminal law approach or an international criminal law approach takes that responsibility from the victim to all of us. We together decide that this is not permitted, that this is beyond the pale, and we're going to stop it. Finally, I'd just like to say that it's crucial that any prosecutions of these or other environmental crimes take a human rights approach. And by that, I mean that they foreground the disparate impact on vulnerable and marginalised groups, which the Special Rapporteur notes in his report, and including the heavier burden borne by women and girls. And here's where I wanted to tie this issue, perhaps for further discussion later in the session, in with the focus on the gender dimension of this aquifer pollution and river destruction. So prosecutions need to highlight this disparate impact. And what I mean is the actual situations and cases that are prosecuted should be cases which illuminate those stories, which show the impact on women and girls, and of course other marginalised groups, racialised groups, Indigenous communities, and so on. And this can help not only build awareness, but it will build a protective body of jurisprudence and start to build a path then towards environmental justice through international criminal law. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. McIntosh, and please stay with us. After the panel discussion, we will have the opportunity to ask questions to the panelists. And I take this opportunity to mention that this event is being streamed and we have a few attendees who are following us online. And the form has been prepared for those attendees so that they can also raise their question. But we will, of course, start by the room. So we are now turning to the next panelist, Musonda Mumba, who is the Secretary General of the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands. Ms. Mumba, we look forward to hear your contribution to this discussion on the Special Rapporteur's strong messages this morning. The floor is yours.
Madam Moderator, thank you so very much for your excellent moderation, colleagues, excellencies. It's such an honor to be here. Pedro, I think we need to be angry. I think we really need to be, because we're in a moment in our planetary dynamics where we're on the edge. We are almost tipping. And sometimes I don't know whether we need a crisis to really tell us that we're tipping, because this crisis is real everywhere on this planet. As the Secretary General of the oldest and most experienced multilateral body, the Convention on Wetlands, the very sources of our water, when we opened the tap to shower, you took the train or you took your car and had the nice view of Lake Geneva. These are wetland systems, some above and some below. Some in civilizations that have taken a very long time to manifest. The Qanat that we see in Qatar or many of the Persian regions. Incredible spaces, In our current level of modernity, we have seen that with the very diverse wetland ecosystems around the world in all 172 countries that are contracting parties to a convention, the diversity and beauty of these ecosystems. I just arrived yesterday from Vienna. We were celebrating the 40th anniversary of our convention, and I took the boat on the Danube, on the one only section of the free-flowing section of the River Danube, which is really the string, the jewel in the crown as it goes all the way to the Black Sea, with many cities, Vienna, Bratislava, Belgrade, all these different cities and people dependent on these ecosystems. I want to say, colleagues, that wetlands are very intersectional. I had the honor in my past life when I worked for the United Nations to do a project in Peru, in Junin. And the first time I went to Miraflores, it was my first time to the Andes, but it was also the first time I saw mining, gold mining. And I didn't quite put it together in my head until I was on the site and I saw what was exactly happening. And your point on mercury poisoning, what we see from the Amazon is the beautiful sight from satellite imagery of trees. What we do not see is the toxicity below it. And I know that recently President Lula and the other presidents of Amazonia had this meeting in Belém and discussed the extent and importance of river systems, healthy ecosystems, but really below the surface, colleagues, we've poisoned ourselves. Each one of us here, I don't know who, each one of us has a piece of plastics in our blood, something we've created. So this crisis is a crisis really in need of a solution. And you touched a bit on this issue of, the burden on women, the burden on young children, the burden on not just the fetching of the resource, but also caregivers. But the fundamental question then comes, who takes care of the caregiver? And a lot of times we have not found this solution. I want to say that the onset, slow onset, and really deep, extreme events, we've seen what's happened in Libya, we've seen what's happening in Greece, we've seen what's happening everywhere in many corners of this planet. These extreme events, when they happen, it's women who are organizing. Look at what happened with COVID. You had to tell your husband, you're not going out of the house. And your children needed to know where they are, because with the return came the virus to your home. Supplies, food, the response mechanisms really at the domestic level starts many times with women figuring out we are the governance systems of microcosms of governments. So when we amplify that to water bodies and to river systems, we have to really be very aware of the need of gender responsive policies. Because the intersectionality of water, as the world meets next week for the SDG Summit in New York, the very intersectionality and importance of SDG 6 is primary to each one of us. And you touched very much, Pedro, on this need for understanding the element of coverage, connectivity. A lot of our systems are very disaggregated, and this is something that as a convention, we're discussing. How do we talk about the issue of connectivity of river systems and wetland systems? I want to touch a little bit on a little bit of the pragmatism of our policies, but also the importance of dialogue. And this dialogue on how sometimes language is a barrier. You spoke about indigenous peoples. These knowledge systems, these elements of conversation in languages that sometimes are not even translatable into English, Spanish, or any of the other languages. In my language, Bemba, and also my mother's language, because my mother was from the Eastern Cape, in Xhosa culture, we actually do not have the word to restore. It doesn't exist. I asked my elders and I said, I have to understand, because in English, to restore, what is to restore? Because we were regenerative and making sure that systems recovered. The UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, which is coming to an end very soon, 2030, in less than 7 years, is a decade where we're talking about, when you see that resolution on the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, it starts with conserve before it talks about restoring. Because we don't know when we enter a 2.5 degree world, what will recover. We don't know. And the effect and impact will be borne mainly by women and children and young people. Lastly, but not the least, I want to talk about this element of mercury poison, because we're a convention that not only focuses on the actual sites, because we have assets as a convention. Your countries have designated Ramsar sites under our convention. These sites are beautiful, they're stunning. I was very lucky to be in Hungary yesterday and also in Slovakia. Beautiful ecosystems. When they are poisoned, they do not only poison us, they're also poisoning the sentient beings that depend on them, the birds. When the birds migrate, they are carrying mercury with them, which is the reason why we have mercury in the Arctic. So the very ecosystem is so interconnected that the sentient beings that we share the planet with are also toxined. So we need to rethink how this happens, the crisis, but also, as I really say, the gender responsiveness of our policy making. We need to go beyond talk and really have actions, because, colleagues, we are on the edge, and dangerously so on the edge. When these crises impact us, they impact everyone, regardless of your economic status. Each one of us on every corner of the planet is affected. Thank you so much, Madam Moderator.
Thank you, Ms. Momba. And finally, to discuss the findings of the report in the context of the human rights to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, as adopted by the UN General Assembly last year, after being adopted here at the Human Rights Council almost 2 years ago, we will now welcome the Special Rapporteur on the issue of human rights obligations relating to the enjoyment of a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, Dr. David Boyd, who has, as I mentioned earlier, pre-recorded the video as he's currently based in another time zone. Dr. Boyd will focus on his thematic report that he presented to the 46th session of the Human Rights Council, which looks at the human rights and the global water crisis, and is echoing some of the messages that we have heard on the panel today. So let me just move to make this thematic happen. Switching to...
Ambassadors, friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, water is the lifeblood of human beings and all life on Earth. Our bodies are 70% water. Aquatic ecosystems purify polluted water, shield coastlines, control erosion, and store carbon. People depend on clean water for drinking, cooking, cleaning, sanitation, growing food, fishing, and recreation. Yet we live in a global water crisis. More than 2 billion people lack access to safely managed drinking water. Water shortages affect more than 3 billion people, and more than 4 billion people lack access to safely managed sanitation. 3/4 of all the natural disasters in the last 20 years were water-related. 80% of wastewater is discharged into the environment untreated, contaminating surface water, groundwater, soil, and the oceans. Waterborne disease kills nearly 2 million people every year, with the greatest burden falling on young children. Wildlife populations that depend on freshwater habitats have crashed 80% since 1970, and climate change exacerbates pollution, scarcity, and disasters. My colleague, the Special Rapporteur on the human rights to safe drinking water and sanitation, has done outstanding work in defining these rights, as well as related state obligations. My report to the Council in 2021, 46/28, took a broader approach. Water pollution, water scarcity, water-related disasters, and damage to freshwater ecosystems have major impacts on a wide range of human rights, including the rights to life, health, water, sanitation, food, an adequate standard of living, development, cultural rights, and the rights of the child. These impacts fall disproportionately upon those who may be vulnerable or marginalized because of their age, gender, poverty, indigeneity, disabilities, and cultural or ethnic backgrounds. Although at risk, these communities have the potential to contribute to water solutions when empowered to do so. For example, women are key actors in improving the way water is used, managed, and allocated. I would like to emphasize that safe, sufficient water and healthy aquatic ecosystems are key substantive elements of the right to a healthy environment, as recognized by regional tribunals, national laws, and national jurisprudence. When it comes to state obligations, states should apply a rights-based approach to all aspects of allocating, managing, conserving, protecting, and restoring water. My report outlines 7 key steps that states should take to fulfill their human rights obligations. First, prepare a state of the water assessment that includes information on water quality, sources of pollution, water supply, water users, and impacts on human rights, human health, and ecosystems. Second, conduct a legal mapping initiative to ensure that human rights are incorporated in water and wastewater laws, regulations, and policies, and ensure that human rights are prioritized in water allocation decisions. 3, develop or revise water-related plans to incorporate a rights-based approach. 4, implement water-related plans and enforce water-related laws, regulations, and standards. And 5th, evaluate progress and, where necessary, strengthen actions to ensure that human rights are fulfilled. 2 additional actions must be taken at every step of the process: building human, financial, and institutional capacity, and informing and engaging the public, particularly women and girls, youth, and other vulnerable and marginalized groups. Ladies and gentlemen, people continue to be murdered, criminalized, and intimidated because of their courageous efforts to protect clean water. States must do more to protect environmental human rights defenders. And businesses are major contributors to water pollution, overuse, and the degradation of freshwater ecosystems. Businesses must do much more to respect human rights by reducing pollution, using water more efficiently, and avoiding activities that damage freshwater ecosystems. My report also contained extensive examples of good practices. Internationally, regional agreements for transboundary cooperation, such as the Boundary Waters Treaty between Canada and the US, the Guarani Aquifer Agreement between Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay, and the agreement between Botswana, Namibia, and South Africa for managing the Stampriet transboundary aquifer. Nationally, good practices include constitutional protection for water, as in Croatia, Egypt, Slovenia, and Uruguay, strong laws, such as the National Water Act in South Africa, policies that empower women, such as Nepal's rural water supply policy, and innovative approaches to conserving water and recycling wastewater, as in Singapore. In conclusion, given the devastating impacts of the global water crisis on people's lives, health, and human rights, remedial actions must be taken rapidly and systematically, with priority placed on improving conditions for the most vulnerable. Fulfilling the rights to water, sanitation, and a healthy environment is essential for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Water pollution, water scarcity, and water-related disasters are preventable problems. The solutions are known and include rights-based water and wastewater laws, standards, and policies, capacity building programs, improved technologies, and enhanced accountability mechanisms. Investment in sustainable water governance and infrastructure must be scaled up substantially, but the benefits are potentially immense. The World Health Organization estimates $4 to $5 in benefits for every dollar invested in water. Making these investments is an obligation, not an option, in order to fulfill the human rights of present and future generations. A human rights-based perspective can serve as a catalyst for accelerated action to achieve safe and sufficient water, empower those working to protect and conserve water, and guide all of our actions toward a healthy, just, and sustainable future. Thank you.
So thank you, Dr. Boyd. We have now 10 minutes to ask questions and reflect on what we have heard from the panel before I give the floor back to the Ambassador of Spain, who will be delivering concluding remarks. So I'm looking at the room. And I see that Sonia Koppel from the UN Convention on Water is asking for the floor. So Sonia, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the report, and thank you for bringing up the topic of water and making peace with our rivers, which is currently an important topic also at global level, following the UN Water Conference from March this year, and following also the adoption by the General Assembly of a resolution on its follow-up just on 1st September in New York. I would like to bring up one additional aspect, which on the one hand further complicates the already difficult issue, but also brings additional opportunities, which is that the fact that more than 60% of all freshwaters worldwide are actually shared by 2 or more countries. And as David Boyd has just said, this further complicates because countries need to address the topic of water pollution jointly. And actually, if we look, for example, at plastic pollution, most of the plastic pollution is in transboundary rivers. If we look at the 10 most polluted rivers in the world, they are transboundary. So, the topic of water pollution reduction needs to be included in transboundary agreements and needs to be considered in water management. On the other hand, we can also see that actually protecting and restoring ecosystem can also bring together countries across borders. We can see that in certain locations around the world, actually the need for restoring ecosystems and for addressing those problems jointly has brought together countries and has brought peace even beyond water. We can see this in Western Africa, in Southeast Europe, on the Sava River, for example, in some of the examples mentioned earlier on by David Boyd. So I think it's overall an additional positive message we can bring that actually by trying to address the problems of water pollution jointly, we can bring additional benefits not only for health but also for regional integration and for peace and security. And I would just like to point here to the Water Convention, which is a unique now global and legal intergovernmental instrument asking countries, actually one of the main obligations is for countries to prevent, control and reduce transboundary impacts. So water quality is one of the main points, and also restoration of ecosystems, degraded ecosystems, is one of the main obligations of the Water Convention. And we can currently see a growing momentum with more and more countries joining. This year alone, 5 countries have joined, Nigeria, Iraq, Namibia, Panama, and most lately the Gambia, bringing the overall number to 52, and more than 20 other countries are in the process. This accession process also now provides an opportunity for addressing some of the challenges mentioned earlier on. My final question now to the panelists is, how do you see the way forward, and how do you see the issue of addressing the mentioned problems of water pollution, etc., particularly in these difficult settings of transboundary basins? Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. I'm looking at the room. Maybe we can pick 1 or 2 more. You want the floor? Yes, please. That's a question. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you. If I can, from here, ask a question, it's to Kate McIntosh. She pointed out that the third element of intervention would be the gender angle. And I think because of time constraints, she was not able to develop it. If you could build a little bit on it, it would be very much appreciated.
Cameroon has also a question, so let's pick 3 questions and then we move on to the panel. And we will start by Kate, as she has a direct question. Cameroon, you have the floor.
Thank you, moderator. It's more as an observation on a proposal or recommendation than a question. I first want to thank all the speakers for their brilliant presentation and the rapporteur as well. We think the issue is well known by many countries, and depending from where we come from, the causes may be shared and slightly different as well. If you talk about water management in most African countries, also links to the fact that urbanizations brought some new challenges to our government, which is waste management and so on and so forth. And we talk about the pollution of the river. We all know that at the basis there was a discussion about the principle of polluter pays, which is very difficult to implement. And we heard about the eco-side approach, which is now how to enforce that. But there's many, I think, challenges for countries to agree. why not thinking about solutions based on countries? What could be the solutions to address those questions, depending on the country, depending on the resources? In Africa, we are demander, but at the same time, we think there's a knowledge, traditional knowledge on, and I heard that from the Ramsar conventions. In my community, normally there was no pollution of river because the river was segmented how you use it, and there was a cultural knowledge on how to use the manure from what you use. You have to put it back in the soil and so on. But many things has changed in the past. So we may suggest that it could be of interest to think about a conference based on the solutions that are existing and how to share those experiences, and also how to fund the need of those countries to address the issue of river pollution. Thank you.
Thank you, Cameroon. So let's start by hearing from Kate McIntosh, her reflections on the observations and questions, and then we will move to Musonda, and then I will go back to the Special Rapporteur. And then sadly, it's time to move to the closure. So Kate, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, moderator, and I'll try and be brief in view of the time. I just want to say what a wonderful proposal from the representative of Cameroon there, and I hope that goes forwards. On the specific questions then, first of all, on the transboundary issue, well, of course, this is not a problem for international criminal law. It's another reason I could have mentioned for what international criminal law brings. So international criminal law, you know, the transboundary issue is not a problem. In fact, it offers some potential jurisdictional solutions. So we might imagine that pollution is occurring if we think about the Rome Statute system, pollution is occurring in one country which is not a member of the International Criminal Court, and so the International Criminal Court would have no jurisdiction over it. But this may move also into another jurisdiction in the territory of a country which is a member of the International Criminal Court, which would then mean that the International Criminal Court could have jurisdiction over the matter. So not an obstacle, may even provide some jurisdictional opportunities in terms of international criminal law. And then briefly on the gender angle, thank you for coming back on that. So what I mean is international criminal law and legal proceedings in general tell stories. And it's really important which stories are told. And we can look at the example of what happened around the prevention of sexual violence in conflict and outside. So when the international tribunals in Rwanda and Yugoslavia were established, sexual violence, rape as a crime was not specifically articulated. Of course, it would be covered by inhumane treatment or violence against the person, but it was not specifically articulated. And actually, through the efforts of civil society, prosecutions were changed. The prosecutor amended the first indictment specifically to include gender-based crimes on the urging of civil society and directed then by the judge. And this gradually built to investigators starting to ask questions and to investigate this aspect of the crime, and it surfaced this element of the crime and it moved into public awareness. And as we know, it led to all sorts of, or generally there was a move in society to look at rape as a weapon of war, to create mandates that dealt specifically with this issue. There was a ripple effect that came from highlighting that particular element, that particular crime. So my vision is that in prosecuting something like the poisoning that we've been hearing of from the Special Rapporteur's report, either as a crime against humanity or as ecocide, the particular cases should highlight the story of women. So literally the case charge should show the victimization, the burden felt by women as a group, a very large group, that suffers a particular burden. And this will surface this particular aspect of ecocide or of crimes against humanity. And if we look at the trajectory of sexual violence in conflict, for example, it can really build institutional protection, awareness, and a protective body of jurisprudence which highlights that gender impact. So that's what I was referring to.
Thank you, Ms. McIntosh. I'm now moving back here to the room, and I will give the floor to Musonda to.
Thank you very much.
give us-
I'll be very brief. I'll respond to the issue of the transboundary to you, Sonia, and also to Cameroon in the same response, because Lake Chad, which also happens to be a Ramsar site, a transboundary water body, is one that has shrunk 95%, partly because of over-obstruction and also climate change. We have seen there the impacts on indigenous peoples, on women, and also the implication on human security. We've seen how this insurgency has surged because the system is almost at near collapse. So these complex problems manifest at the transboundary and no respecter of borders. And the impact is really mostly felt by women and children. I liked your point on solutions. There's a fantastic book by Julia Watson called LawTech, L-O-T-E-K, Indigenous and Traditional Technologies and Solutions to Many of Our Problems. And these have been mostly designed by women, because the very reason a lot of indigenous call Mother Earth, Pachamama, because she's mother, she's the giver of life.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mama, for these powerful words. Mr. Special Rapporteur, before we move to the closing, your reflections on the questions and observations you have heard today.
Yes, first of all, thank you very much. Excellent. All of you. I must tell you that my other thematic report this year will be presented in New York in 1 month, is Water for Peace. So I am very happy to have Sonia with us, because it is one of my references in the second report, is the Water Convention. So someone told me the other day, oh, you have made two reports, is Water for Peace and Peace for Water. Yes, well, when we ask just about what can we do, I say, well, we are doing at present. For instance, I'm not particularly proud to be European. We have good things and bad things as everybody. But there is a very good thing, is the Water Framework Directive. That is a reality. And we are trying to change and changing. And what is the main goal of the of this directive? Is augment the richness of Europe in general. No, is to recover the good ecological status of the rivers' aquatic ecosystems. And at the beginning, people told me, "What happens in Europe? Do you have majority of Green Party in Brussels?" No, I think is pragmatism, Anglo-Saxon pragmatism. I think the Anglo-Saxons discovered first than Latins and others that is good to recover from a pragmatic point of view the natural engineering that is moving all the water cycle is a good deal. And so we are in this way. And I remember when I went in that time at the beginning of this century in Mexico, someone told me, "Oh yes, Pedro, but this is Europe. This is to have safe, healthy rivers is a luxurious element for the rich countries." I said, "No, for us it's good, but for you it's vital, because we have money for dealing with polluted rivers. But the impoverished people have rivers directly. So the impact is direct. So what is something good for us is a need, is a vital element for everybody. And I think we are in this way. So we must change the approach. But on this question is not just the question of sovereignty of each country changing, because we have in a global world strong responsibilities for the most developed world. Most of big companies, most of activities, economic activities are led by companies coming from the richest world. So we have a great responsibility in sharing this responsibility, like with the global climate change and so on. We are in this way.
Thank you very much. And with these words, we really need to move to the closing because we are over time. So, Excellency, we will hear now from the parent representative of Spain, Ambassador Aurora Diaz-Rato Revuelta, the concluding remarks of this event. Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, and thank you for your efforts in pronouncing my name. It's really a talent as much as water governance is for all of us. Thank you so much for the organizers, dear Katrina, for your very, very good input. Thank you for sure for all the panelists. The remarks have been not only heart-moving, but also brain challenging. So we start Friday with a very, very interesting morning and very moving session. It has been really, really a pleasure to have this event this morning. Thank you so much for your attendance and for your very interesting questions coming for the floor. Our objective has been to enhance the conversation around the last report that it was presented by the rapporteur yesterday to the Council, and to do so from a gender perspective. After listening to all of you, I believe we have succeeded a bit. I think that this gender element, which is always evident but not sufficiently put on the table, has been very well addressed. This event brings together two of the priorities that guide my country's foreign policy on human rights: the recognition and protection of the human rights to water and sanitation, and the commitment to gender equality as a transformative agenda that must be at the center of multilateral responses to address the challenges we face. We know that access to water and sanitation saves lives, but aquatic ecosystems are badly damaged. Yesterday, Pedro, you urged us states to react to the fact that 2 billion people do not have access to safe drinking water. This is not something inevitable, but the results of decisions on the governance and management of aquatic ecosystems which violate the rights of the poorest and the most vulnerable. The intersectional approach of your report is essential to address the world's water crisis. Reversing this situation means putting people and the planet at the center, as you very well mentioned. These two agendas converge. The complementarity of your work with other mandate holders of the Council, such as the Special Rapporteur on Environment, and who had a very good presentation, is very commendable. Let me come back to the importance of wetlands. 1 billion people depend on wetlands for their livelihood. Wetlands provide precious ecosystem services for water and water security, food and livelihoods, biodiversity, human health, climate change. They are essential for the good functioning of a planet, for our own survival. Their conservation is a responsibility of societies as a whole. This is expressed in the Strategic Plan for Wetlands in Spain to 2030. Therefore, recognizing the role of women in the conservation and protection of wetlands is crucial to empower their communities and end poverty. By nurturing wetlands, communities are empowered, and we can achieve progress towards ending poverty. The work being done by the Ramsar Convention is very much to be commended and a real benchmark. In short, mainstreaming gender is key to ensuring democratic and inclusive water governance. Let us act on your recommendations with a view to strengthening the ecosystem resilience and make peace with our rivers and other wetlands. Thank you so much for your attendance, and have a good Friday.
Thank you, Excellency. The event is now concluded. Just to mention, because I didn't say that earlier, that the video of this event is already available on the webpage of that was announcing this event. The link is available on the screen, and that the summary will also be provided on the same page. Thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Very efficient chairing.
Well, we went over time.
No.
And next week, I forgot to make publicity today.